It is time to replace the coolant on my second gen Sequoia. We recently bought this big bubbly beauty and it has 200,000 miles on it and we had no maintenance history. So I'm going to assume that the coolant has never been replaced on this. So I'm going to go over the top 5 questions regarding a coolant change on a 5.7 V8 in a Sequoia and Tundra, and hang around to the ends. I'll show you how to do a coolant flush coolant change. So my wife took the Sequoia to get a safety inspection so we can get it tagged, and in Missouri they only charge $14 to do it at a repair shop, and so the mechanics, they don't make any money on it, so they try to upsell you, and they told us that our coolant was acidic to try to upsell like a coolant flush, which I don't doubt them. But you can get coolant test strips, but I'll link some down below so you can test your coolant and see if it's acidic or not. We definitely don't want acidic coolant in these all aluminum engines. Question 1, what coolant do you use? Well, this is the coolant you want to use from Toyota, the 50/50 pre-diluted super long life coolant. There are some cheaper coolants out there, aftermarket. I don't know too much about them. You probably want to do your research, but you want to make sure that it's ethylene glycol and it has phosphate inhibitors. This stuff is kind of pricey. I think I paid 25 bucks a gallon, so I'm sure you can find it cheaper elsewhere. And there's probably some dealers that charge a little bit more than 25 bucks a gallon, but yeah, it's kind of expensive. Number 2, do you need to drain the block in addition to the radiator? Well, it was actually pretty easy and it doesn't take any extra time. As you will see in the video showing you how to do this, while the radiator was still draining, I was able to undo both petcocks on the side of the block and allow those to drain as well. I'm not entirely sure how much coolant came out. It gives you a little peace of mind that, hey, you got a little bit more of the old coolant out so you can put more fresh coolant in. Number 3, what is the capacity? How much of this are you going to need in your system after you drain it? Capacity will vary depending on how much coolant you get out. Obviously, I did both petcocks on the side of the block and drained it, and I drained the radiator. A lot of people say that you'll need about 3 gallons, meaning that if you buy 3 gallons, you won't use all of it. I ended up having to do more than 3 gallons. So I bought 3 gallons originally, used it all, and I didn't have enough, so I had to go buy a 4th jug, and I ended up probably using about a pint out of this one. So a minimum you'll need 3 gallons, and that will work for most people. You may pick up a 4th gallon just in case, so you have some on hand in case you ever have a leak or need to top it off, or in the situation where you need a little bit more than 3 gallons like I needed. Number 4, what is the interval for changing the coolant? Well, the first time it shows up in the maintenance log is at 100,000 miles. So at minimum 100,000 miles, but every other maintenance interval will say inspect and adjust all fluid levels. So if you are inspecting your coolant regularly with those test strips that I was talking about, once it starts getting acidic, you may be changing it before 100,000 miles. 100,000 miles is really the only time where it says replace engine coolant. My maintenance manual only goes to 120,000 miles and I don't see it again in here. So the manual says to replace it at 100,000, but people like the car care nut recommend changing it every 50,000 miles. So technically my Sequoia should be on its 3rd coolant change, but like I said, I don't think it's ever been changed. And number 5, are there any special tools needed to bleed the coolant system? No, not necessarily. I just used a funnel. I have this funnel that fits in here just perfectly, and I was able to fill it up. If you've watched some other YouTube videos on how to do coolant change, you'll see some people with like these big funnels to allow it to burp, or they have this pressurized system that pressurizes the coolant into the system. You don't necessarily need that. You can do it easily with a funnel. Just pour it in there slowly, and then you'll warm up the engine and adjust as necessary. So those are the top 5 questions regarding a coolant flush on a 5.7 V8. Comment below how many miles your 5.7 has on it. Now let's replace the coolant. The tools I used was a 3/8 drive ratchet, a 5-inch extension, a 19-inch extension, 10mm socket, 12mm socket, a 3/8 swivel adapter, a funnel, a couple drain pans, and a bright light. If you are focused, you could complete this job in less than an hour. You'll want the system to be cold. I'm doing this in the morning after the Sequoia sit overnight. I I went ahead and removed the radiator cap so the old coolant can flow out of the drains easily. To make access easier, you'll need to remove the engine splash shield. This should have 3 screws with 10mm heads. This is where the front bumper cover secures to the splash shield. Of course, those are missing on my Sequoia. And then you'll need to remove the 5 bolts with 12mm heads that secure the shield to the frame. And of course, I am missing a couple of those. Once removed, you will see the radiator drain. Position a large drain pan under the drain valve and start to unscrew it. You don't have to remove it completely. Once you open it enough, coolant will drain out. Now initially I had the idea that I wouldn't drain the block, but with a bright light I was able to find the block drains through the fender wells, and opening them up was super easy and worth it. First I started with the passenger side. To make it less frustrating, you'll need to remove a clip from the forward rubber inner fender guard. I then used a 19-inch ratchet extension with a 10mm socket. I have heard of some folks having a hard time breaking those drain bleeder bolts free, like maybe they were corroded. Mine opened up with minimal force. Once I opened it enough, coolant started to drain out. For less of a mess, you could stick a length of hose on the end of the drain that would direct the coolant to a drain pan. It looks like a 1/4 inch or 5/16 diameter hose would work just fine. I didn't use a hose and just let it run down the side of the engine into a second drain pan. Then I went over to the driver's side and did the same thing. I chose to go in front of the strut tower. And like the other side, I had to unclip the forward rubber inner fender guard for easier access. This drain plug is a little harder to find, but it is possible. Since I went in front of the strut tower, I had to use a flex socket. I didn't have a flex 10mm socket, but I did have a wobble adapter and placed that after the socket. With the same 19-inch extension, the bleed screw on the drain valve opened easily. I was able to position my drain pan from the radiator in a manner that collected coolant from both the radiator and the driver's side block drain. When the coolant from all 3 drains stopped dripping, I went ahead and jacked each side of the Sequoia up. I first did the driver's side, and a lot more coolant flowed from the passenger side block drain. When coolant stopped flowing from that location, I then jacked up the passenger side to drain the driver's side of the block. Once the dripping stopped, I was pretty satisfied with the amount of coolant that had been drained. Then I snugged the bleeder screw on the driver's side block drain, and then went over and did the same thing on the passenger side. You do not want to over tighten these since they are brass. And don't forget to clip your fender well guards back in place. And before I move on, let's tighten the petcock on the radiator drain. Don't forget to reinstall your engine splash shield. Now, I forgot to show you this, but you'll want to drain the reservoir too. There is a hose fitting at the bottom of the tank that you can remove to drain it. Simply squeeze the clamp, pull towards the engine fan, and then remove the hose. If the hose is stuck, try twisting the hose on the nipple to break it loose. If you can't do it by hand, you can get a pair of pliers on the hose to twist it. Once it spins freely on the nipple, you should be able to pull it away and allow the coolant to drain. Once it's drained, reinstall the hose and clamp. We are now almost ready to refill the system. Now take a step back and double check that you closed all 3 drains. You don't need any special tools for filling the coolant, but you definitely want some type of funnel. And have you ever seen this trick before? Use the tab on the cap to break the seal on the jugs. Makes it easy. Now let's start filling the radiator. Some people need about 3 gallons to fill their system. I assumed I needed 3 and ended up not having enough. I went to the dealer and picked up a 4th gallon to completely fill the radiator and the reservoir. Once filled, you'll want to start the engine and bring the system to operating temperature. Now in older cars, you want the heat set to high because that opens the coolant flow valve to the heater core. But on the 2nd gen Sequoia and Tundra, hot coolant always flows into the HVAC box, and the cabin temps are simply controlled by airflow blend doors. A trick to remove some air bubbles in the system is to squeeze the upper radiator hose where some air can get trapped. You can do the same thing on the heater hoses near the firewall. Keep checking the radiator and keep topping it off as the air bleeds out. Once the level in the radiator doesn't seem to drop anymore, add some coolant to the reservoir, filling it between the high and low marks. After checking for leaks, I took the Sequoia out for a little drive. And of course, she leaves me with an empty tank. The engine got up to operating temperature. Then I came back and let it sit overnight. The next morning, when there was no pressure in the system, I removed the radiator cap and checked the coolant level. I needed to add a couple more ounces of coolant to the radiator and maybe another 8 to 10 ounces to the reservoir. My wife drove the Sequoia all over that day. When I checked the coolant again the following morning, it was right where it needed to be. And that is how coolant replacement is done on a second gen Sequoia or Tundra. So I hope that helps. We should be good for another 50,000 miles. But if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.